Hi, my name is Susan Doyle from Box Media, and I will be the moderator today. I would like to welcome you to Lean Construction Ireland's 15th webinar, the topic of which is the UK Get It Right initiative, GIRI, presented by Tom Barton. If you have a question, please type it in the question box, and we will consolidate and ask Tom in the second half of the webinar. If there are any questions that we don't get answered during the webinar, we will follow up by email afterwards. The agenda will be as follows: opening introduction by Richard Fitzpatrick, and then the presentation by Tom, followed by questions and answers. I will now hand you over to Richard.
Thank you, Susan, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us on the webinar brought to you by Lean Construction Ireland in conjunction with Box Media, as Susan said. I'm Richard Fitzpatrick and Chair of Lean Construction Ireland, and we're delighted to have Tom Barton. Tom's the Executive Director of the UK's Get It Right initiative, to present on their initiative to significantly reduce errors and the consequence of these within the UK construction sector. And as a key drive for adopting Lean is the elimination of waste. Today's topic is very relevant to Lean Construction Ireland as well as the Irish construction sector. So I look forward to see what Tom has to share with us. Tom's a chartered civil engineer and a fellow of the Institute of Civil Engineering and holds an MA from Oxford University. He's over 40 years in the construction sector and spent most of his career working for two major contractors. He's been involved in many projects in the UK and worldwide. He started his career as a project engineer in the NatWest Tower in London, and over that time he's been responsible for projects such as the Millennium Footbridge, Croydon Tramlink, including projects in Riyadh, as well as a new airport in Kazan in Russia. A key for Tom throughout his career has been the strive for excellence on projects, and believes that the Get It Right initiative is a real opportunity for the UK construction industry to improve its productivity and, more importantly, its reputation. Objectives that equally apply here to the Irish construction sector. So look forward to what you have to say there, Tom. I'll hand over to you now in your presentation on the Get It Right initiative.
Okay then, Richard, thanks very much indeed for that, and good afternoon everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. It's a real privilege to be able to talk to you about the Get It Right initiative, just one of the projects that Richard said that I was involved with was the Millennium Footbridge, and of course it's got another name in London. It's called the Wobbly Bridge. That was quite a fraught time when that all went a bit pear-shaped. I'm not going to talk any more about it now, but it does show that sometimes I have been involved in one or two things that were a bit more dramatic than I would have liked them to have been. Let's put it that way. I'm still very proud of that project, by the way. So let's get going. So just to sort of set the scene a bit, this is just a really nice block of apartments. I think this is an architect's image. It's now been completed, so that's all fine. And I'm just going to tell you about a little problem that the guys and girls had when we were building it. So there's the piling layout for it. And as you can see, most of the piles are in either north-south or east-west configuration. Pretty simple stuff. And well detailed. All the coordinates are there, and so nothing can go wrong. Well, one Friday morning, the consulting engineer was doing whatever he was doing in his office. He got this phone call saying that the piling rig had just gone through a sewer. Well, as you can see, there's no sewer on that drawing. And after a bit of investigation, the consultant discovered that the problem with the drawing was that they'd forgotten to put one layer on. And there was another layer which showed all the utilities, and it showed a sewer running north-south. So at least they'd found out where the sewer was, and they were keen not to stop the job. So they told the contractor, well, the thing to do while we sort it out is move the rig 30 meters west and carry on piling. And as long as you're 30 meters west of where you are now, there shouldn't be a problem. After lunch on the Friday, the consultant gets another phone call saying, oh, we've gone through the sewer again. And they say, well, how can you? Because we told you to go 30 meters west and the sewer's running north-south. Ah, we thought you said 30 meters north. So there we are. There's a problem. A, problems with the basic information being wrong, and B, when something's gone slightly wrong, then the next thing that happens is that there's a communication breakdown. At the end of the day, I think the project was fine. So getting it wrong. We don't like getting it wrong, and what does it do to us as individuals? Well, you can see what I've written there: frustration and stress, overwork, damaged reputations and relationships, career failure, poor health, injury, and death. And you hear every now and then of somebody who's got seriously ill, had a nervous breakdown, you name it. All those sorts of things happen when things go seriously wrong. Business, well, damaged relationships, reputational damage, financial loss, business failure, and potential criminal prosecution. Here in London, as you know, we had the tragedy at Grenfell last year. Somebody's going to be prosecuted, quite rightly, but somebody's going to be prosecuted for that, for getting it wrong. Clients and society, again, a little bit tied up with Grenfell. Poor value for money, missed opportunities, environmental damage, wasted resources, and poor health and loss of life. We tend to forget sometimes that what we do directly affects people's lives, and it's just important that I think we do remember that. So getting it right. Well, again, we've all been involved with things that we've done, whether at work or at home, where we get satisfaction and we have good workload, and we have our career goes well, and we have good health, and we're enjoying ourselves. I think if you enjoy yourselves, you're more likely to have a good health and long life. So that's a good reason for getting it right. Good relationships, reputational, financial gain, business success, and no criminal proceedings. And that's a pretty good place to be as well, basically, from a business perspective. And of course, you hear about companies that have, in every sector, that have got a good reputation, and they keep doing well because people go back to them all the time. Then, of course, every now and then one of them gets it wrong, and lo and behold, a reputation disappears. So clients and society, again, good value for money, opportunities taken, good environmental benefit, and we save on resources, and we'll come back to that a bit later on, but and good health. So those are some of the drivers, just from a moral point of view, I suppose, as to why it's good to get it right. So just going back to the beginning, about 3 years ago, I and a colleague, Ed McCann, we were talking about what is the root cause of error, and how much do we think it actually costs us? And so we persuaded the Construction Industry Training Board in the UK to fund us to do a research on just that. However, the Construction Industry Board, they actually said to us, we'll give you some of the money, but you've got to get money from industry. And at the time, that was a little bit difficult, but in fact, it was the best thing they ever did, because we did get contributions from the companies that you can see on the right-hand side there. But more particularly, we got a lot of data from them. And that was really important, and that really made a difference to what we were doing and how we were going to do the research. So this is the cover of the report that we originally carried out. So the research project was to identify the costs, the costs of error, the parts of the process, and how they happened, where they happened, and the root causes. We used the grounded theory analysis, and we worked with strict confidentiality rules, which meant that, going back to the companies that I referred to, that they were prepared to share with us a lot of data. And that's also an interesting point about sharing or not sharing about things going wrong. Lots of useful data about how things were going wrong. So that really went well. Literature reviews, again, if you've read the report in detail, you'll see that we actually did research right the way across the world. And the sad thing for our industry is that the reality is that don't think that this bit of Europe is the only place where things aren't going well. Frankly, whether you go to Australia, it's not much better there either. So the industry as a whole, there's something that we need to fix sort of worldwide, I guess. Review of data provided by the companies. I've mentioned that. We got a lot of very good data. And interviews with senior construction professionals. Again, we saw a lot of people on a one-to-one basis. We ran an online questionnaire, and then we had the Delphi-style workshops with industry experts to rank all the results of what we were doing. But one of the points, and I just come back to confidentiality, we ran all these workshops, so we'd get all of these companies who normally are pretty bitter rivals, and we'd get them in a room, and we'd talk about these issues, and we'd talk about them on a very strictly confidential basis. And it was really interesting to just see how they all started to talk about each other's issues, share each other's issues. One company would say, well, we've solved this issue by doing whatever, and you'd see everybody else writing a note and say, well, that's a really good idea, we must go and see whether we can't do that. So all of a sudden we were getting a sort of quite a lot of growth in knowledge, if you like. And this isn't really commercial knowledge. It's just how we can make the industry better. So that was a really positive part about the whole process of when we were doing the research project. So as you've probably seen one of the key results was that we in the UK are wasting, we reckon, 21% of UK construction turnover on error. Some of it's easier to record than others. Latent defects, most companies in the UK are probably putting aside about 3% for latent defects. Unrecorded process waste. Some people have got some difficulty with that, but and in fact, I have been accused by people of how do I know what it is when it's unrecorded? And that's a pretty valid question. The reality is that whatever one is pricing, whether it's to do construction work, whether it's to do design, one assumes a degree of inefficiency, and one assumes that people are not going to do it as efficiently as they could do. And so that 6% is just because people don't get around to doing things in quite the most effective way. And all we're saying is that you could, if people plan their work, whether it's planning how you're going to do your design, whether it's planning how you're going to do the project, or planning how you're going to do tomorrow's particular job, whatever it is, if it was planned properly, you would save a lot of, you would save quite a lot, and certainly that 6% could come well down. Direct cost of error, that's sort of the cost of non-conformance reports, but again, most people will tell you that you don't get all of that, because again, there's a whole issue of, do people report all the errors that they know about? Answer, probably not, because the environment they're in, it probably means that somebody will then give them a hard time for not having, for allowing the error to happen in the first place. Slightly different than the aircraft industry, where people are encouraged to report errors. So the 5% is what we think it is, but very few companies that we've come across have actually got figures as high as that, but they all say as well they're seriously underreported. And then finally, indirect cost of error is simply that every time there's something having to be put right, the process has to stop while that is put right. Either the process is stopped or the project is delayed. So to that extent, that's a reasonably measurable figure. So that's 7%. And of course, this doesn't include opportunity costs. So every time resources are being used to carry out corrective work, they're not doing new work, and that's not included in those figures as well. We could argue about the 21%, it could be 15%, some people have said, other people have said 30%. One thing's for sure, certainly in the UK, the average profit of most contractors over a 10-year period is 1.5%. So this is an order of magnitude and the rest higher. So there's money to be got if people actually set their minds to do it. So it's an iceberg, as I've already talked about. And again, forgive me, I know I'm not talking to people in the UK, but these are the sort of statistics we've got. UK spends 22 billion a year in putting errors right. Now just think of what projects we could all build if that sort of money was made available, because we hadn't spent it sending it down the drain, basically. So areas in which the cost of errors is the greatest. And I don't suppose this is a huge surprise. Concrete is pretty near the top. Mechanical systems, facades. Anyway, I'm not going to read them all out. You can see the sorts of areas where we have the biggest problems and where the biggest costs are. So clearly, one way of trying to address it is obviously address particular elements and see where that gets to. So, but those are most of the things you'd expect to see, I guess, in most of our projects. So the root causes of error, and this one, when we originally when we did it, we were quite surprised about what we found, because if you go through that list, the word skills is the last word on the page. And then that's not skills about whether it's design or brickwork or concrete work or whatever, it's supervisory. And more particularly, coming back to the top of the list, inadequate planning is the top root cause of error. And again, as what I hinted from a moment or two ago, that's not just, I mean, it's planning at project level. How do you plan right from the beginning in terms of design, procurement. Are you going to get the procurement in the right place? Are you going to procure things in the right order? All of those things, pretty obvious questions. Quite often they don't happen that way. We all know that. Right the way through to tasks as, is the bricklayer or the carpenter going to plan what they're going to do tomorrow, so that they've got all of the materials, information, whatever it is they need, so that when they start, they don't get interrupted. So that's a pretty fundamental thing about what we're saying. Late design changes, again, and design changes only happen for two reasons, to my simple mind. One, because the client has changed his mind, his or her mind about something, which may be really necessary, may not be, I don't know. Or secondly, because perhaps the design wasn't fully completed or not absolutely correct, and therefore things have to change. And in my experience, every time you have a design change, you have a recipe for disaster. And you do wonder about changes, and I'll tell you a true story that's now 40 years old. When I was a site engineer, a little bit more than that eventually, but on what's now called Tower 42, but was the NatWest Tower in London, 47 stories high, we got the drawings for the foundations, got round to revision AW. So that's about 50 revisions, something like that. And at one point when we were trying to get it finished, we were putting starter bars every day. Every night we finished, no, sorry, lunchtime every day we thought we'd finish that evening, and then we got another revision with more starter bars to go in the next day. Crazy way to do things, but there we go. And a pretty good way to make sure there's some mistakes made. Poorly communicated design information. Again, one of the things we've discovered in some of the workshops I'll come to later is that actually people aren't very clear. Designers are not very clear how their information is used when it gets on site. Now that's a pretty fundamental thing. And it's just quite interesting when you actually interrogate people, they really don't know. And that's, I'm not blaming anybody, I'm just saying that's a fact. So somehow it would be good if that was improved. Poor culture in relation to quality. And that's something that I personally feel very, very strongly about. There are all sorts of tools to help us get things right. But fundamentally, people need to want to get it right. And people need to be in the environment where they can get it right. I don't believe people come to work to do it wrong, but then things get put in their way. So it's something we need to remember, and it's all the way through. Some of the other things you can see on the list: poorly coordinated and incorrect design information, inadequate attention paid in the design to construction. I'm sure you recognize all of these things. Excessive commercial, financial and time pressures. And I'm not going to sit here and say we're never going to have those sorts of pressures and we shouldn't have those pressures, because of course we are. But it's how do you manage your way through it. Poor interface management and design, and I'll come back to some of what we're trying to do about that shortly. And then communication, ineffective communication between team members. Does the procurement department really understand what the designer is really looking for? And does the designer understand that whether what he's specifying is actually procurable? It's quite interesting when you go into that. Do people really know? So we have too many silos. How do we find a way of dealing with that? And then inadequate supervisory skills. So we then also asked our members to, excuse me, I had to have a drink of water there. We asked our members to just tell us how, if they had some money to invest, how would they invest that money? And you can see this is the pie chart that we came up with. So there was 21% on trade skills, but over 50% was on what I would call, softer skills, whether it's planning, design, management, and culture. So, and that's well over 50%. So that's the area where people think that we should be devoting our time and energy, and indeed whatever resources we've got to make things better. So the report that we did came up with 4 recommendations. It said that we should have a skills development program, a campaign to change and align attitudes. We should improve management processes and systems, and improve construction technology and techniques. And I'll just explain the last one. And if you've heard my example before, because there may be 1 or 2 people have heard me say this before, I don't make any apologies. we're always saying that we can't do things the same as the automotive industry. I don't agree. I think there are lots of things we could do. And my example is if you look inside the bonnet of your car, you'll see some quite complicated wiring, quite a few different cables running around the place. Yet your car has never seen an electrician. The assembly worker, and I'm certainly not knocking an assembly worker, has literally picked up the component and installed it, plugged it in at both ends. He or she can only put in the right cable, and you can only put it in one way. Either it works or it doesn't. And I do believe there's an awful lot that we as an industry could do to develop what I would call sort of binary approach to things, so that mistakes can't be made. Because with the best will in the world, we are relying on humans, and to some extent, humans are quite good at making mistakes, as we've already talked about. So what now? And what happened next? So at the beginning of last year, we decided that we would try to set up a company, which is called the Get It Right Initiative Limited, to see whether we couldn't push forward some of the recommendations that I've just talked about. And we started with a dozen members at the beginning of the year, and now you can't see it all because I now have to have 2 slides, because we now have 31 members, mainly contractors, but 1 or 2 other quite interesting people. We have got Network Rail who, as an example. We've also got a firm called Waitmans, and it says law is our business. And of course they are a firm of solicitors that spend their time dealing with professional indemnity claims when they've really gone pear-shaped. And it's very interesting if you talk to them about what things happen and why things have happened. Of course, we don't know the detail, but they are very much involved with trying to see what we can do in terms of reducing error. And they are part of our design working group, because they can share with us some of the things that have gone on, that they know have gone on. We also have an insurance broker, Howdens. They're on the first list. So 1 or 2 interesting people there, basically. So one of the things that we've done, so the company was set up basically to continue the campaign, and I'll come back to that in a moment, and to, in the first year, to concentrate on training. And again, I'll come back to that. But the 4 areas where we've decided to set up some working groups is 1, errors in design; 2, a measurement of cost and impact of errors; 3, training courses; and 4, how to use technology to eliminate error. I've just talked a little bit about the technology one, so I'll come back to the others. So errors in design, we are coming back to the point that, if you remember that the slide that we had as to what the root cause of errors, quite a lot of it was to do with design. Well, so we have set up a working group with a number of designers, and we're coming together to try and identify certain key areas that companies and organizations could adopt that would help them to make less errors. And it's not just about checking processes, although that's part of it, but it's also about attitude. Are you allowing the right amount of time? All of those sorts of things, basically. Have you got the right person doing it? What can we do about standardization? I as an engineer, I'm baffled as to why every time somebody is designing a new structure, they get some poor graduate engineer to redesign the joints, or some steelwork joint or something, where, to be honest, it could be completely standardized. Anyway, that's just a thought from me. Measurement of the cost and impact of errors. There's been a lot of work done about how much we're spending on errors, and I think the answer is we all know we're spending far too much and the impact's too great. What we're trying to do here is a little bit more than that, is we're trying to see if we can find a common metric that every company would be prepared to publish about their performance in terms of errors. A little bit like accident frequency rates, where now every company, when they're pre-qualifying or trying to tender for a project, has to specify their accident frequency rates. It's a fairly crude metric, but it is a metric that is recognized. And if we're trying to get the world, if you like, to move away from just lowest price is best, if we actually had a metric that says, well, this company seems to have a better quality record, for want of a better word, than that company, that might help in pushing things in the right direction. Training courses on culture, design management, and interface management. In terms of culture, we've been running courses or workshops with people to how to avoid error, the three-hour workshops. And they're all, as I say, they're about culture, not about processes per se. And I'll come back to training courses a little bit further. And then the use of technology to eliminate error, which I've just mentioned. So again, I talked to you about the investment and how people felt we should invest in terms of improving things. And this is our diagnostic tool. So you can see we had a number of different different headings: attitude, culture, skill and understanding, and so on and so forth. And at our workshops, what we ask people to do is to vote, and they each get 2 votes. And just this is the next slide shows you the sort of indication as to what we got out of one particular workshop. And so pink stickers were number 1, and yellow stickers were number 2. So you can see, and I know, I'm sorry you haven't got the complete slide there, but you can see that quite a lot is to do with attitudes and information, and also culture. Although I'm sorry, some of that's a bit out of the picture. In terms of our campaign, press and publications, this is one of the first articles that we put in, and that was with the RICS in London about error and what we were trying to do to reduce error. Because I think, again, we make no apologies that one of the reasons that we focus quite a lot on cost is that maybe if the people who run businesses really get hold of it and really understand that this is a cost driver and they can actually do something to improve their profitability, they might take more interest than perhaps they are at the moment, where I think there's too many people who just say, well, we do the right quality, end of story. So I talked about, I was going to come back to training, and again, the Construction Industry Training Board, interestingly enough, towards the latter part of last year, they put out an inquiry for how to improve productivity. I think the whole of Western Europe's talking about how we can improve productivity, and they have offered quite a large £500,000 to industry to come up with pilot training courses as to what could be done and what could be moved out across the industry so that people really started to direct increasing productivity or improving quality. So we, with our members, and you can see the dates there, November 2017, it had to be in. We and our members, a number of our members, about a dozen of our members, decided that we would put a 3 bids in, which would be on a theme about productivity. Something's gone wrong there. I'm sorry that. I'll go back. Okay, I think I may come to it later. Forgive me. Something has gone very slightly wrong, but I'm sure we'll come back. So anyway, we put the bids in, and I can tell you that we are now negotiating with the CITB for 3 separate courses. One to do with improving planning and planning skills for frontline supervisors. Secondly, with dealing with errors at interfaces and design management. And thirdly, leadership for project leaders and so on and so forth. So, and I'd say there are discussions that they have, if you like, unofficially said that we are going to have the funds, but it's just a matter of working through it now. So this is one of the workshops that we ran on a project up in Scotland, as it happens, about how to change behaviour in terms of improving quality. And this particular workshop, one of the interesting things that came out was there was very little buy-in from the teams into inspection and test plans. And at the end of the session, they decided that what they wanted to do was to involve everybody in inspection and test plans. So they've now changed their processes. So as an inspection and test plan is produced for a new element, they actually invite some of the people right at the sharp end, the foreman and maybe one of the operatives even, to come in and go through it with them so that there's a better understanding of what can and can't be done, and also a better understanding from the people at the sharp end as to what's really important. So I think that's an interesting way of trying to get people to actually buy in and see the relevance of what they're being asked to do to deliver the right quality. And that's got huge parallels in my mind to what's been going on in the health and safety world, where, you know, fortunately in the last 10 years we've stopped just telling people that you will do this because you will do this because that's what it says, and getting people to a place where people are now saying, well, actually I want to do this because I know it's going to make it safer for me and my colleagues on the site, and I'll make sure that my colleagues are also doing that because it's in my self-interest. So a whole cultural approach rather than just a rule book approach. I talked earlier about the campaign, and this is just a slot as we were starting in the middle of last year. The campaign, as I say, at that time we had 12 members. We now have 31 members. And we also have a website, which I'm sure that you've been on, and we're constantly trying to update it to keep people informed as to where we're going. And we also have a Twitter account and Facebook. And I'm sorry, this is in the wrong place. Forgive me, but so I can't always get it right either. But the training courses that we've got with the CITB are to do with frontline supervisors, culture, and then design management and interface management. So I could go on about all sorts of things, but I think I've sort of made the key points of what we're trying to do. And the key point is planning, thinking about things, culture. And if we stop and think, and if we make sure that when we do whatever we're doing it correctly, we're in with a chance. So thank you for listening to me. If you want to know more, you can ping me an email or go on the website. There's an answer thing there. And so, as I say, thanks so much for listening to me. So thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Tom, for your presentation on the Get It Right initiative. Very insightful there, and appreciate you sharing with us some of the research that you've done as part of that initiative into what some of the root causes are for errors on a construction project. I think a lot of that presentation will resonate with a lot of those people who are on the line, sort of listening and watching that presentation. I think it's interesting, the feedback from the research identified, and I want to say it's UK based, it certainly applies to all the construction industry, 21% of waste and error. And if you look at the National Development Plan, which the Irish government launched last week, which is 116 billion over the next 10 years, with 21% of that is wasted. There's a lot of public money that could be better spent on schools, on infrastructure, on health projects, and all that sort of good stuff. So really sort of reaffirms the need for the sector to try and improve and move itself forward. It was interesting, some of the root causes about poor planning, changes in design, flow of information not as efficient, poor community. All those things to me resonate in the sense that we should be looking at lean adoption and lean principles being applied more within the construction sector. And you talk about the softer issues, the training of people, the culture, the behaviours. You know, if we can get that right, that's a huge step change in terms of creating a better working environment and delivering sort of better value from construction projects. Collaboration in that workshop there towards the end, we looked at how we could reduce errors through that construction project. All that is sort of aligned to the principles of lean collaboration, wanting to improve and reduce the waste. So very much appreciate that presentation, and thank you for that. We have a couple of questions that have come through. If I can share them with yourself and send them and share them with you, maybe you could answer them for us. Yep. I've got one here which says, what do you see as being the biggest constraints on changing culture and behaviours within the construction sector?
The biggest constraint is, first of all, realising that the problem is as big as it is, and secondly, having realised that, for people to then say, I can do something about it. But that realisation has got to come from the very top, because if it doesn't come from the top, again, it's a little bit like health and safety. If you don't have the right leadership from the very top of your organization, then it sort of gets diluted, because people will just say, you know, well, we've always done it like this. And yes, I know we waste 20%, but we're still making a margin on this job, or this job's still within budget and all of that. So it's a matter of and it's interesting that I, without obviously telling tales out of school, I know for a fact that there's, within the UK construction industry and the companies that are involved in it, there's a wide spectrum of interest at main board level in terms of getting it right. At one end, there are boards who are really interested, and that shows in the way they're operating. At the other end, there are boards which, as long as the bottom line appears okay, who cares really? So the biggest constraint is, first of all, recognizing that there really is a problem, and secondly, recognizing that if I, as a leader, was to actually show leadership, I could actually make something happen about it.
So it's got to. So you're saying it's got to come from really the top in an organisation to the want to change and the need to change.
Absolutely that, and you can see. I mean, I'm clearly not going to name names, but I can see companies where clearly not necessarily some of the big names, some of the less big names, but where the leader of that organisation has really got the message that this is a good way for him or her to deliver a better business financially, but also a better business in terms of reputation as well, basically. And I know of a company that's actually spending a huge amount of time, not just on attitude, but also on processes and how they do construction, what more could they do off-site, all those sorts of things, because they can see that in the long run, that's the only way they're really going to survive.
And I mean, every business is in business to make money, and if you can make more money by being more efficient, reduce waste, it's got to make sense. Absolutely. There's another question that's come through here. Who is involved in the errors and design group, and is anybody considering design business models and contracts? I'm assuming that question is around looking at the design improvements within the design process.
Well, there's a couple of questions there. One is about who are involved in the design group. We have both, we've got designers, we've got some of our members who are designers. We've also invited some of our contractor colleagues who also employ designers to bring some of their designers into the working groups as well. So there's a little bit of a cross match between both, let's say, consultants and contractors design managers. So those are the people who are involved. Are we looking at contract? I'm one of these people that all my life, and it's actually, you're wrong, it's now 50 years this year since I joined the industry. All my life, people have said, well, if we only had a different form of contract, it would all be better. I completely and fundamentally disagree with that. Things go well when people want to make them go well, despite the form of contract. So I'm not a great believer in forms of contract being part of the solution. That doesn't mean to say that I do agree that if you can find a way of involving in early stages of design, involving constructors as well, so that the best solutions come up, of course that's a good idea. But contracts per se, I'm not convinced about. And if we have time, I could give you an example as to why I think that.
Well, that's an interesting point, and I'm sure there's others that are on the line would say, well, actually, the only way we can drive some different thinking is by incorporating lean thinking and practices into a contract. Otherwise, if it's not there, people don't want to do it. And if the business dynamic is the opportunity to create additional revenue through inefficiencies in design, then maybe supply chain see it as an opportunity. So that's probably one for another day. Another question that's come through, Tom, technology is having a greater influence on the way construction projects are being delivered. In terms of your Get It Right initiative, what role do you see technology playing? And do you see that being a key factor in achieving the Get It Right initiative objectives?
We do see technology as being important. I think I said that in our first year we were starting with a campaign and avoiding errors workshops and training, because literally, you know, when you start from nothing, you can't do everything all at once. Technology, we are, in terms of starting to look at it quite seriously, we are looking at it seriously, and we hope actually later in the year to have an open session which will be invited to anybody to see where we've got to on the technology front. I'm absolutely convinced that technology has a huge part to play, not just in terms of, I mean, there's all the digital side in terms of BIM and all of that, all of which is important as long as it's run properly, but also in how do we and off-site construction's talked about more and more. And I come back to my wiring in a car as an example. And so we want to try and glean some knowledge. We are looking. We've now got a working group. We've got a researcher working on this as to what's out there, what works and what doesn't work. And just as an aside, if you've got 5 minutes, if you go on our website, there's an article there with a picture of an apple on it. Forgive me, I've forgotten the name for a moment, because that's about something that went wrong, not in our industry. It went wrong in making medical instrumentation. And partly that's to do with personal circumstances which needed fixing. But also they then said, well, actually, a particular function this lady was doing didn't need to be done by her at all. There was a way of automating it, and that would get rid of the error as well. So it applies across the board. So I think it's incredibly important because, again, we have to find a way of doing it in a more efficient way, because that's the best, more efficient way, and a way that is guaranteed to be right.
No, I think it certainly your absolute technology is becoming a greater influence on how we deliver projects more effectively and more efficiently. No doubt about it. We'll see that increasing in the coming years. There's a couple of questions come through which have linked with the one on contracts, so I'll sort of pass on those. But there's one here where someone has identified trying to read the construction an interface matrix to ensure construction projects are fully clear and understand how we finalize. I'll come back to that one. There's quite a weighty one there, so I'll hit another one here while I'm checking the text on that one. In terms of the project delivery process, Tom, which of the key stakeholders do you think has the greatest influence in driving that cultural change? Is it the client, is it the designer, or is it the contractor?
In an ideal world, it's the client, because if the client is sympathetic to the ideas and gets it, then in the first place, then the designer and the contractor are in with a chance. The difficulty clearly is if the client actually doesn't get it. So it does really need to, I mean, in an ideal, it certainly needs to be accepted by the client, if not grasped by the client. And you know, I come back to the point and talks about design. You know, does the client leave enough time for the design to be done? Does the client recognize that actually investing in design up front probably, or not probably, certainly will give them a better product at the end and a cheaper product at the end? And there's a lot of people who don't really understand that. So at the first place, it's got to be the client. But you need everybody to take part, because otherwise, you know, if one particular part of the chain doesn't believe in it, then it's not going to help. Having said that, I do believe that I was involved with this workshop with someone not so long ago. There's an awful lot that each organizer, if you divide it into those three between client, contractor and designer, there's a lot of things in each part of that each of those sectors which you can do regardless of what the outside world is doing to you. And I think that's a comment I'd make. I think as an industry, we're pretty good at blaming everybody other than ourselves for something not going right. In fact, we're fantastic at that. But in my belief, that even if you've got a customer who's perhaps not as sympathetic as you'd like him or her to be, there's no reason why you still can't be doing things in the lines that we've been talking about. It doesn't stop you from thinking, doesn't stop you from planning, doesn't stop you. So all of those things you can do regardless of what the client's doing. Okay.
No, I think it sort of links with the drive for change. Has it come from the top in an organization on a project? Arguably, the client, if he's the fee payer, is, you could say, is at the top of that chain. He's got to drive it as well and want it as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Just there's one that's come through here. Said, we're finding that knowledge of building regulation standards and technical regulations is not fully understood by project teams and design companies, which is causing quality issues and errors on site. Do you have any thoughts on that? The understanding of building regulations and other standards?
Well, yeah. Again, I mean, I'm not sure how much on your side of the water you've been following Grenfell, but Judith Hackett's report, interim report, says that part of the problem is that the building regs per se are actually not understandable. I think there is a big issue about making sure that people do understand them. And you know, it is actually inexcusable, in my view, for designers not to understand the building regulations. And if they don't understand them, not to have found somebody who can help them so they do understand them. In my view, there's absolutely no excuse apart from sloppiness. If you want to get it right, you will find out what it is you need to know to make sure that you do get it right. Does that sound too simplistic? I don't know. And then at the same at construction level, it is beholden on companies and individuals, in my view, to actually make sure that they know what they're doing. Because you know, if you don't know what you're doing, and of course, if you don't know what you're doing, then you shouldn't be doing it. And the other point is, I think the other point to remember, and I said this yesterday to somebody else, is as an industry, we're getting better, but we're still a long way away from where we want to be. We're a male-dominated industry, macho industry. And as my wife always says to me, I'm useless at asking the way. I don't like asking people that are admitting I don't know. We've got to get to a place where people at every level actually admit that they don't know, so they go and find somebody who does know. And then there shouldn't be a problem. Easy for me to say, I know, but it's no good just saying, well, I don't really understand it, but it'll be all right, and I'll pass it on and forget about it.
Okay, no, absolutely. That's point well made there in terms of that. You need to know what you're doing. Absolutely, otherwise you're.
Yeah, you need to know that you don't know what you're doing. That's pretty good too. If you don't know
what you don't know, you're in a good space.
Correct.
Yeah,
exactly.
This question that I was referring to earlier on, what's being raised here is the need for constructability reviews and interface matrices with all the project stakeholders taking place more at the start of the project rather than at the end, so people know what they're going to be commissioning, know what they're looking at in terms of system validation and verification and things like that, not necessarily the end of the project. And I suppose it looks like it's more of a statement rather than a question, that we should be looking at this whole get it right process at the very start of a project design process, not when we're coming towards commissioning of the systems in the building.
I think that's completely right, and it does come back to, in fact, what Richard, you and I were talking about beforehand about gateways. You know, at every stage during the design process, are all the right people involved in making sure that they're actually getting what they want, that the project is going to do what it's supposed to do, and is it all of those? Is it commissionable? All of those things, and there's a lot of skill, and I'm certainly not saying that's an easy task. But again, my experience is that when I've been involved in a project where that's been done properly, it's pretty simple to get it all the way to the end without too much pain, basically. But it's about planning. Again, it's still, I mean, I come back to the fundamentals. It's planning. I mean, interfaces, how you're going to commission. It's actually thinking ahead rather than thinking the day before it's going to be done.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But if you plan ahead, then you'll know what you get when you get there. So I think absolutely, Tom. There's a question here which is probably a bit more specific, and it says, has the Scottish team keen to drive ITP&R noticed any improvement, i.e. in reduction in NCRs? Okay.
The answer is I don't know, because they're still doing it. I suspect they might get more NCRs. What we found, and my experience certainly on the health and safety front, was when we got better at controlling this and monitoring and reporting it, actually in the first case, for the first 6-9 months, the number of incidents reported went up. And that wasn't because there were more incidents, but because people were more on the ball and prepared to report them. And if you come back to the point I was making about 5% on the actual cost of correcting errors, but only 2.5% is actually recorded, I think the first thing you would see is actually an uplift. But the straight answer to your question is, at this point in time, no, I've not had some feedback.
Okay, I'm conscious of time. I have one last question, which has come in. It said, obviously, the research that was done as part of the research project to identify where where the core issues were, was lean identified as being a means for perhaps addressing the waste and reducing errors and omissions. Did that come from any of the supply chain involved in that survey?
Some of the supply chain are involved in lean, and it was discussed, but it was not really put down as a key factor one way or another, to be truthful. It was discussed, and clearly, a lot of the lean principles, and particularly, I mean, the huge amount of lean, we were all singing the same hymn sheet in terms of thinking and planning and all of that, and that was discussed. But as a fundamental part of it, no, and that's why it doesn't appear in the report.
Okay. Well, listen, I'm just conscious of time, so we'll wrap it up there, Tom, and thank you indeed for your very insightful presentation and for answering all those questions. Really appreciate that. For those who have sort of tuned in, a copy of the presentation will be on our Lean Construction Ireland website over the next day or so. So on behalf of Lean Construction Ireland and Box Media, Tom, I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time to prepare your presentation and sharing it with us this afternoon. Lean Construction Ireland's next webinar is on the 15th of March, and details of that we made available on our website, and those who are registered with Lean Construction Ireland will get a notification of that over the next coming weeks. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Thanks again to Susan for setting up, and Tom for your insightful presentation, and look forward to joining you again at our next webinar. Thank you indeed.
Okay.